we have a true OG with us on the show. Over the last 6 years, he has led the marketing initiatives for some of the largest projects in the Web3 space, ranging from major crypto exchanges such as OKX, Mexi, to blockchain games such as Gods Unchained. He has also worked with Sandbox in the metaverse arena and has a big hand in helping NFTs become super popular, one of which is an NFT project you may have heard of called Cool Cats. And with me right now, we have the coolest cat of them all, Timothy McCloud. Welcome to the Web3 Mission Possible podcast, Timothy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Felix. I'm excited to be on. It's hopefully people will learn something and we'll have a good time. Yeah.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here, and I'm pretty sure, I'm absolutely sure the nuggets that you'll share will be absolutely invaluable. So let's start off with this. So before getting into Web3, you worked for some of the biggest companies in tech and in the entertainment space for nearly 2 decades. Some of the notable names are Warner Brothers, EA Sports, and Adobe. So you could have easily stayed with any one of those already established companies and continued to be successful there. So here's the million-dollar question. Why did you take the big leap of faith into Web3 and crypto, especially at a time when the space was really new and extremely blue ocean back in 2017, 2018?
Yeah, over the last maybe 5.5 years, I ask myself that same question on a regular basis. I leave the comfort of established tech. I would say I've been really fortunate to find myself in roles and at companies that are really helping to move us forward. These are truly innovative companies. One example is obviously when I was at EA, they were already figuring out how mobile gaming was going to become at the time. This is 2000, and how mobile gaming was going to become significant. So it's interesting. I look back with kind of digital, I guess, Web 1. I was essentially in Web 1 after graduating school, and then found myself in very early days of mobile development. So on the marketing side, this is 2009. And then again with Web 3 and blockchain and crypto in early 2018. So if it's how technology can really enhance daily life, how it can provide anything from entertainment through gaming to financial sovereignty through crypto and DeFi. So I think it's a really long answer to probably an easy question. I want to see constantly curious about what else is next and how I can be a part of it.
I love that answer, by the way. And we need people like you to be really the pioneers or the people that really push forward in terms of a new frontier, or very forward thinking in terms of, okay, this is where we're at, but where could we really leverage this technology to really improve the quality of life for people? So that could be in the arenas of, let's say, business all the way through to the regular user, right? So
Yes.
from what I understand is that you want to be in the front seat to really parlay that into the present, and then also have your influence into the future as well. So it's always exciting, and to some people, there's a sense of thrill that comes with it as well, right? Because it is the unknown. So people view the unknown with different perspectives. But here, especially as a pioneer or somebody who's forward thinking, it brings also a lot of curiosity and excitement to see what type of outcomes and results that you could really impact in terms of the future. So that's certainly some exciting stuff, and we'll get to some of the things that you're working on that ducktails into that forward type of thinking, and also seeing Web3 as being a huge part of the future, very similar to how you had mentioned at EA Sports in 2011. They were at that time recognizing or had realized that mobile gaming was going to be a very significant thing, and obviously now it's been 12 years since then, and that has come to fruition, right?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, to be honest too, I mean, it's not been all rainbows and shiny, I don't know, shiny pearls. That's probably a bad reference, but it's not
That makes
been.
sense, though. It hasn't been like
Yeah,
all easy, pretty much, right? Like everything has
exactly.
been simple. There's been obstacles and so
Exactly.
forth.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I have friends who have stayed with the large tech companies, and and they're happy, and they do get to work on
Hmm.
projects within the organization, right? So I do think that there's something to be said. There are multiple routes. I chose a route where I I find that I can get into a startup or to an early stage company and really help identify what is needed, what is the stage appropriate approach to marketing and growth and analytics. And so, but again, it has, especially I'd say the highs and the lows of Web3 and crypto, it can get challenging because you have a fair amount
Hmm.
of confidence that the industry is not going to go away, that Web3 is not going to go away. So,
Yeah,
but it's
absolutely.
been right. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that answer. By the way, it takes a certain type of person to really come in there because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows and peaks and valleys and so forth. So you really have to come in even keel in order to tackle a lot of the challenges, and we'll get to that as well in terms of what are some of the challenges that Web3 companies are facing at the current moment. But right now, you had mentioned something about in terms of the marketing side, and I just want to dive into that. You've been in the space for a very long time, 6 years, leading the marketing for some of the biggest projects, most recognizable names such as OKX, which is a major crypto exchange, see all the way to blockchain gaming to metaverse plays such as Sandbox, NFT plays with Cool Cats. You work with layer ones, layer two with the Oasis and Anchor, have been involved in numerous 10 plus ICOs and token launches, and especially as a key role in all of those, one example being head of growth for OKX. So, a lot of the listeners on our podcast here, they want to know like your thoughts on what did you find were some of the key similarities and differences in marketing, for example, a major exchange such as OKX versus, let's say, marketing, let's say an NFT project such as Cool Cats. And if that would be awesome to have you share your thoughts in terms of, let's say, the user acquisition strategies or retention strategies based on the type of Web3 project that you're handling at that moment. And community building is absolutely huge too. So that'd be excellent to hear your thoughts on that. So let's start with the user acquisition, retention, and the key similarities and differences when it comes to marketing all those different types of projects within the Web3 arena.
Yeah, so user acquisition and growth, and user acquisition really picked that up in the Web 2
Hmm.
world, but brought some of those concepts and some of the things that had worked well into Web 3. And I would say early adopter. What does that profile look like? And I think we're still Web3 is still at a very early stage of adoption, right? When you think of the percentage of people globally who actually who own crypto. Now in the US, I think the last figure I saw was around 20%, and that's probably within the last 6 months. So, but still a long ways to go. So what I when it comes to growth and user acquisition, I'm really focused on both the places, if it's within social or outside of social, where there's a profile of a person who would consider themselves as an early adopter. There are some parallels too with, I'd say, core gaming audiences. So when you think of a gamer, depending on the type of genre, their risk profile, right? So risk
Hmm.
reward, a lot of psychology that's built into marketing and user acquisition. But a gamer risk profile is they're probably a little bit higher. So they are willing to take a risk when they're playing games. And we found that there's a lot of that same behavior when it comes to the early adoption of different concepts in Web3. So if it is cryptocurrency trading, if it's DeFi, if you're staking your token, at the foundational level, that's really where I focused growth in user acquisition, and I continue to do that because there are two reasons. First, the gaming audience or the gaming population is now ubiquitous. So like I don't know a person at any demographic, any age that isn't at least on their phones, maybe in Wordle or some sort of a game at times. And so
Correct.
refine that approach somewhat, where you're really looking for a person who is willing to A, learn about something
Hmm.
new, and then B, is willing to put themselves into it, and it could be financially too. And that's the one of the key differences I'd say, both when thinking of marketing and growth in Web 2 versus Web 3. When there's a financial component, it creates there's obviously a considerable amount of challenge, and sometimes there's even roadblocks that are regulatory and compliance
Correct.
considerations, right? It's really, when thinking of marketing to a Web2 audience and getting them to adopt and come into Web3, that's one approach for growth, and that worked really well at OKX when I was there. We were averaging around 30 or 40,000 unique visits a day to
Wow.
the app, or to the it was and a lot of that too is market. But component that you mentioned is actually, what are the differences between, within Web3, a centralized exchange to versus a DeFi platform, and then versus even maybe a layer one or layer two chain. Some of the obvious differences is the who the audience target is, or who your core customer is, and obviously with L1s and L2s, that is going to be really focused on developers. The interesting thing is, and I did a few over the last, I did this, went through this process a couple times, where I'm looking at even the developer profile, and within that developer profile, what are some of the sub segmentation that starts to become obvious, and a lot of developers are gamers.
That's
And so,
interesting. So the gaming
yeah,
background seems to be something that's popping up as a consistent theme then. So
that's
whether it
right.
was just a regular user that wants to dive into crypto and Web3, and then on the development side, they have some interest and overlap in terms of the gaming space as well. So is that what
Yes.
you have seen in terms of, let's say, from the development point of view, is a lot of developers, they actually play games, or are they working in the gaming industry, let's say in Web 2, or a mixture of the two?
Yeah, I would say when I have looked at this across the last couple of years, it's been a little bit of a mixture. I think more obvious is that they have an affinity for gaming. It doesn't matter what type of gaming, but it's just that, and that gaming is in their background. It's an interest. And if I recall, the percentage of Web3 developers. So these are developers who either started in Web3
Hmm.
or made the transition into Web3 development, and that percentage of that cohort is indexes very high in gaming, right? So like, if I recall, it was 70 or
Oh wow,
80%
yeah, it's
of
asymmetrical
that
for
cohort.
sure.
Yeah. So that's where, when it comes to user acquisition and growth, so it is, I think we're still in this place where it's building the profile. The early adopter I think, has to be a part of that. If a gaming profile is a part of that, I think that could be helpful. And then you really go to the places where they are, right? If it's Discord, Twitter, X, if it is social, if it's maybe in forums, or if it's in
Wherever they're
support.
hanging out online, pretty much,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly,
That's
exactly.
excellent. So let's say that because in the Web 2, so let's actually examine really quick the difference between really marketing to an audience that was more Web 2 based versus Web 3. Just from what I can remember is Web 2, that's when you had your WhatsApp and the more private groups start to come up, and it was not so much a lot of the focus during that time. So this probably be mid 2010s. A lot of the focus was more focusing on like the open social graph. It would be like the more Twitters, Facebooks, Instagram, things that people post content that would be available for the public to view. Here, with the especially with the acquisition of WhatsApp, and then you had the genesis of the rise to popularity of Telegram, and then really
Yes.
Discord, and breaking through the kind of like the gaming arena. And as you mentioned, because Discord is really like it was known for people who were like playing games on Twitch, for example. And now that you had
Yeah.
brought that up, that the early adopters are gamers, now it makes sense why a lot of the people where people hang out is on Discord. So it's very nice to draw the connection that you had just brought up there. So here, in terms of the marketing, is it like a lot more in terms of focusing on these? Okay, how do we get these more kind of like private groups that exist on like the discourse or those private channels, and also the private groups that exist on Telegram, because we didn't really like need to focus on the more like the private messenger side of things during the mobile era. It was more the like the Instagrams, and the closest thing would be like a Snapchat back in 2012,
Right.
2013, right? But here it seems like in Web 3, a lot of now the attention is focused on those private groups that get formed through those private messengers. Is that something that you're seeing as well? That's the core of a lot of marketing in Web3 in relation to when you compare it to how Web2 marketing is done?
Yes, absolutely. And it certainly made things more challenging when it comes to really driving adoption in Web3. When I think back to Web2 gaming or even in mobile gaming, from 50 to maybe 70% of your new users coming into your game would come from the centralized social networks, right? A lot of that was because back a long time ago, Facebook it was really the seamless experience. When you would go into Facebook, you would see what your friend was playing, which game they're playing. And it's literally like, and this is browser-based gaming, but you get right into it because your friend's playing. It's
Farmville
trust.
or whatever game
Exactly.
back in the day, and you'll see in your feed that friend X is playing this game.
Exactly. You could really, I would say, both from a budget perspective, but even just a resource and focus, really, majority of the attention was on scaling up your social media campaigns and content. So we don't have that anymore. We don't really have those mechanisms in place. We've attempted to replicate it in different ways. I'd say when you think of like a quest in Web3, if
Hmm.
part of that quest is to go follow the project's social channels, right? So that there are components of kind of virality or that really viral approach to growth that work, but it's never going to be at that level. So you really have to have multiple campaigns, multiple tactics working simultaneously to really get to that point where people are talking about it, the press is talking about it, and you're hoping that in some of those closed networks, like a Telegram or Discord, you are hoping that what they're saying is true, right, or
Hmm.
is accurate. And as we know, that hasn't always been the case with Web3. There's a significant credibility problem for certain projects. It is more difficult.
Yeah, the challenges are certainly different. We had like how you mentioned the centralized social networks, and it was a lot easier to see what your friend was playing. So it enabled gaming, for example, or projects in general to be able to spread like wildfire a lot easier. But here with the private groups, you really don't know what's really going on until you're part of it, right? And you just hope that
Yes.
at this particular moment that the marketing spills into those channels. So in terms of let's say the community building, because that seems to be a big part of let's say those private channels, they're usually run by, you call them influencers, they call them KOLs, for example. But let's see how, because really the rise of influencer marketing was during the mobile age as well, right?
Hmm.
Because there were a lot of
Right.
people who had big channels, but they had no idea how to monetize it. They were just happy back in 2010, 2011 to get a t-shirt, for example,
Yes.
or anything of
Yeah.
that nature. Then it became a really structured business around 2014, 2015, around that area. So here we fast forwarded almost a decade later. It's a really mature industry, and we're seeing now a lot of the influencers. They're the ones that seem to be controlling a lot of the community building, and the Web3 projects are now partnering with these influencers or KOLs, for example, and through a really strong relationship. We did a podcast with the former VP of marketing for Axis Infinity, and what
Oh,
he had
wow.
learned was that the relationship between the Web3 companies and the influencer is, they would dub it or call it strategic gifting, which is so that, let's say that the influencer really loves the project, and then it would the company would unexpectedly reward the influencer or their community with some sort of reward, for example, but it
Hmm.
was unexpected, and that's the best type of reward when it comes to people having gratitude for receiving something when it's not in the cards, for example, right? So from your experience, are you seeing that being a big part of how communities are really built, especially to support specific Web3 projects that have strong relationships with those influencers, for example?
Absolutely. I do think there's been a little bit of I'd say a reconfiguration, at least
Hmm.
from the projects that I've been managing marketing for. It is to be sure that there's an organic connection with an influencer or KOL. that it's not just purely we've allocated budge for this influencer for them to talk about our project or our token coin, right? So that model, I think, and to be honest, we'll kind of go through a little bit of refinement. I'm glad, because the one thing that I know is that when working with influencers and KOLs, it is the most effective component of those campaigns are to get people in, right? So get them to follow your project, get them to go to your Discord server. I think where I've seen sometimes that fall off, and it is anything that happens after that first action, right? So liking some of those really super easy kind of top of the funnel actions. Yes. And in some cases too, depending on the influencer, we can track a cohort of users that came in, and then in the example for OKX or centralized exchange, we can track that there was maybe a deposit made and there was trading happening. And so, but I do think now, within the last year or so, I seek out those who really have a genuine interest, either personal interest or maybe they have a network that just seamlessly aligns with whatever the project is. And so, because those instances, what I found is the relationship with that KOL or influencer, it's a bit more long term as well. And then the people that they bring on, retention and engagement are higher as well in those instances. So I do think it's still absolutely necessary. It is what I attempt to do quickly, and I would advise anybody who is tasked with growing or scaling a Web3 project to do, is to really start to build out an ambassador program. So an internal influencer program, right, where you can identify the people who are loyal to your project. They're following the project, they're involved for the right reasons, and they become a part of the ambassador program. When I was at one of the largest DeFi platforms a couple of years ago, we had an ambassador program that we built of 1,000 people, right, and so globally. And so when you think of that 1,000 people who are advocating for your brand and who are just
true fans of your project.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And to be honest, that's how we quickly became the number one DeFi platform at the time, is really through just an extremely robust ambassador program.
I love that. Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's the working with KOLs and influencer. What you have found and what the industry has found is that it's a great way for the initial user acquisition, top of funnel, for example, to bring people or into your ecosystem. But where the drop off was happening was, okay, well, after the influx of people come in, was it a leaking bucket after that, where we're seeing these people just exit? How do we create the sponge to keep people around during that time? And it's really finding ways to now create ambassador programs, identifying the people who are really advocates and true fans of your project. And then from there on, that's how you're going to have that sustained growth, as opposed to huge spike in terms of users that come in, and then there's going to be a big dip, and then from there on it could be flatline, right? So every project is looking for the sustainability, and that ambassador program is something that's so powerful that will enable that sustainability for a project to happen. So Tim, I'm glad that you highlight that, because I think a lot of people think that, well, what I'll do is I'll just partner up with a bunch of influencers or KOLs, and then my project is just gonna take off and be around for the next year or two, right? But more often the case, after that, it even takes even more effort and planning in order to figure out who are the people that will continue to be around even after that initial influx of people. So that's certainly a key area, and I'm glad that you brought that up in terms of retention, because it seems that at this particular moment, a lot of people are just focusing on, okay, well, we'll give you the best airdrops, for example, bring a bunch of people in, get our project a lot of attention, and then after that, like, you'll never ever hear about that project ever again, right? And from the VCs and the investors that I've been talking to as well, they're now actually looking for real sustainable businesses. It's more than just, okay, well, that's great that you could get people in, but how can you actually turn this into a business that could last for a while? And one of the challenges, of course, is keeping users engaged. So let's actually touch on that in terms of how to keep the users engaged, because initially, or even at the current state, that we're in right now with Web3, the focus has been primarily on tokenomics and then on the user experience. And this is parlay that into the gaming experience. So let's say the gaming experience, for example, as number one, and then the tokenomics. How does that play, and how do the two really work together to create like a user experience that is more inclusive and more unique than Web 2, because Web 2 is not financialized, right? So here now you have a financial component to it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of, are you seeing that shift now? And then also, what was your outlook in terms of how those two factors play together to create a new experience that doesn't even exist today?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Felix, I was smiling during that intro because not a lot of people fully understand how far we still have to go is relative to UX and UI in Web3. I mean, it has actually absolutely been a blocker. It's been a significant challenge. When you think about all of the resources that you're allocating towards marketing, you can attribute a significant drop off at times because of a confusing onboarding flow, or because there's a disconnect in what I saw on the project's Twitter page and what I'm seeing in their app, right? I mean,
Correct.
So it's been one of the most frustrating components, I think, of Web3. But then I have to remind myself, when we think back to the early days of mobile games, they were clunky too. I mean, you would go through like a tutorial, you play the first like tutorial, and then you'd close out of the app, you'd go in and it wouldn't recognize that you already finished the tutorial, and so you have to do it again. You know, so
remember those days.
So I think I shouldn't be so shocked and so disappointed, because it's exactly what happened in mobile. The only difference I would say is the Web3 is inherently complex. Concepts in Web3 around like blockchain or like ZK rollup, all of the things around staking and DeFi. I feel like every day that I work in Web3, I feel like I learn either a new term that was just created yesterday, and
That's
and
tons of memes to support that too.
that's right. You have to have your strategy to support. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So I think even if we looked even deeper into kind of just the same people, it's certainly an echo chamber. And I referenced before, it's the gamer, early adopter, they're tech savvy. Maybe some of them are developers. And I know, and I'm looking through the metrics and analytics, and I'm just seeing like these profiles that are starting to emerge that are very similar, and which is good, right? I mean, part of marketing is, and actually Facebook did this brilliantly, is this idea of lookalike modeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have an audience, you have an audience or a customer that is extremely valuable, and you attempt to go find that exact same person, right? And so that is still an extremely valuable tactic when it comes to growth and user acquisition. I attempt to replicate that wherever I can. However, where I think we're at now in Web3, branch outside of those safe, we can start to think of different audiences that would benefit from decentralized finance, or maybe audiences, or maybe artists that maybe could find a path in creating collectibles to be used in game, right, in blockchain games. So I have struggled a lot with it's an internal conflict of wanting to to grow a project,
Mm-hmm.
and to deliver beneficial to the project, with really wanting to test completely new demographic, behavioral profiles, different channels. And really, we haven't discussed content too much, but even have a content strategy that speaks to those very specific segments. So, and to be honest, when I've surfaced this in the past, I've not been met with like openness or open arms.
Open arms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's great. Wow, good job for thinking outside of the box. But why don't we just stick to what's working?
Right. So
So yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Timothy.
Oh no. So I'm going to continue to find maybe a sweet spot between acquiring and finding users who fit a profile, but then also branching outside. I do think, and I saw this when on the DeFi side, there is still such a significant opportunity for people to achieve a level of financial sovereignty with cryptocurrency and DeFi that I have not seen any other technology provide. So I would love to be able to balance significant growth with finding those pockets of people that fall outside of the typical profile but that would benefit.
I love that, this comes in line as you mentioned. At the very beginning, we talked about how very forward-thinking you are in terms of wanting to really push the envelope and see where this technology, how it could impact all the different segments, and how it could be a big contributor to how the future unfolds as well. So right now, as you mentioned, a lot of the thinking so far in the Web3 space, especially when it comes to the Web3 projects, is really just it's an echo chamber. It's been just focusing on this is the typical user profile. Let's just go after them, and you have a million other different Web3 projects going after the same type of people, right? But here you see opportunity that exists outside of that bubble, for example. And as you mentioned, like for DeFi, you see an opportunity there that no technology currently offers that will enable people to have. And what I like to hear your thoughts on is let's dive into some of those segments that you're talking about. So they could be gender related, females, for example, underserved people, people of color, maybe people from different financial layers, for example, people from different countries. Where would you start off, for example, if you were to create content, education material, and as you mentioned, balance it with the current task of getting users in real time for the project and being like, okay, we got that down pat. Now let's just start focus on this different segment where they could benefit, and but they may not know that we really exist yet. How do you get onto their radar, and what segments, name the top 2 or 3 segments that you would go after right now in terms of really cracking open that or bursting that bubble so that it continues to expand and really be much more inclusive of the general population in total?
Yeah, I think first I'll just start off by saying, Felix, what you mentioned around exploring other segments outside of the echo chamber, that could very well be a competitive advantage, right? You mentioned everybody's going after the same user, which is exactly the case, right? And so one of your competitive advantages when it comes to growth and marketing is you're not going to neglect that approach, but you're also going to put more resources behind uncovering new segments. And so I just want to make sure that is restated, because it is, even I forget that could be
big competitive advantage.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now what it will require is require a couple of things. I mean, first is you have to have an open mind. You have to maintain an open mind. You have to be able to have either internally or outsourced content development that is flexible enough that it really takes into account some of the educational needs of specific segments. You have to have buy-in internally, right? And so I mentioned before, just some of the projects just answer the question. Some of the, I think, that I've been exploring and I've attempted to work into marketing and growth plans. The first is going to be female, right? So when we think of gender, it's no surprise that predominantly male, and so that's absolutely an area that I focused on. In fact, when scaling community teams and also building a community strategy, I have, that is a big part of the representation, both within the team, but more so the content. And we do have to think about how content can differ slightly based on the segment. I think another area of opportunity is, there's a lot of discussion, especially in the US, like financial literacy, big failure of the educational system in this country.
Yeah, I don't think that's part of the curriculum when it comes to the educational system, is to teach like how the financial world works.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in school and I got a credit card, which everybody gets conveniently when they're maybe not the most financially stable, which you're in college. You
just turned 18, right? And they're like, hey, one of the first booths that you see when you walk through, for example, a college or a university is like, hey, why don't you sign up for credit card X, for example?
Absolutely, yeah. Because I still don't understand that approach, because I know that I got to a point where I couldn't pay I think it was American Express. I couldn't pay the bill, right? I was also working full time, but I didn't really have any concept of what that would do, like how it would in fact my impact my credit.
You're right.
How I could even like when I graduated, if I wanted to buy a car or a house, like how that could. So not to go down that rabbit hole because it is I think it is a epidemic, at least in the U.S. Leveraging content and really focusing on educational content, right? So we have all types of content, fun, entertainment. This is really educational. So it'd be a lot of maybe tutorials, maybe there's a lot of infographics, but like sequential tutorials. What is an interest rate? What is APY? So I think even at that level, really bridging some of the concepts, the financial concepts from traditional finance into decentralized finance. That's another area that we've focused on. How can we educate a segment on even some of the concepts in traditional finance, but how they differ in decentralized finance?
I love that.
Yeah, so
Because there is a clear lack of education when it comes to the financial system and understanding, as you mentioned, is one of the first things that we get introduced to when we turn into an adult, even though we're not ready financially to take on those responsibilities. It's okay, like how does, like how you mentioned, like interest rates work? How does a credit card work, for example? How does it affect your credit in the future? So let's say sometime on the road you want to purchase a car. How does what you do today going to impact that particular decision moving forward? Buying a house, for example, all those different facets in terms of how it comes together, and being able to create to educate on all those different levels. It's something that right now is a huge gap, and it seems like right now that the main people, the hardcore people that are in Web3 and crypto, they have a strong interest in finances. Obviously that's why they're in there, but a lot of people chasm that they need to jump over and cross, and that's where the education comes in and helps them create that bridge, so that Web3 is now another option for them to consider in order for them to get to where they're currently at, to crossing over that bridge, right? So you're focusing more on the educational process, and people in general that are, let's say, that need that type of education in order for them to improve their quality of life, especially from a financial point of view, using, let's say, Web3 technology, right?
absolutely. Yeah, and I think what you hit on too, and it's probably one of the most important takeaways to think about when you're building a content strategy is when you show somebody something that they didn't know about before, there is this connection that is established, right? And so in what we've running tests and also running surveys or quantifying and qualifying some of our approaches to content, when they learn something and they believe that it can impact them, they're building loyalty and they're building trust through that process.
100% agree.
Yeah, and so the educational content strategy is the ultimate goal to get that person to, if it's DeFi or if it's a trading platform, is it to get them to convert and to start trading? Yes, but is there a secondary benefit by taking a bit more, putting a bit more resources behind educational content and really considering the needs of content of different segments? The secondary benefit there is that they may build a relationship with you much quicker than they would have if they didn't have that.
I agree, and especially with how young the Web3 space is, right? And it continues to rapidly develop and mature, of course. And as you mentioned, like let's say in what's happening, sometimes a disconnect between what it is that you'll see on, let's say, their X or their Twitter, and then you'll go to, let's say, their actual project, and it'll work totally different, and some trust may be diluted during that process. So here, if we could look to mend the fences, so to speak, and first of all, okay, that this would actually be like a UX UI problem. Like let's make sure that we work on that. But at the same time, as you mentioned, what also builds trust is, hey, like we're putting out content that's going to help educate you, bring forward new ideas, new thought processes, and new, for example, insights that maybe you haven't come across before because of something that's new that you learn that comes in line with what you had just mentioned in terms of how when you learn something new from somebody, it builds that level of trust between those two people, right? So here, obviously, it'd be between, let's say, the user and the Web3 project. So I think that's fantastic to lay out, especially at a time right now where one of the biggest barriers is you see in the news, it's some sort of security breach or some sort of rugging that happens. We really need to, especially if we want to bring on the everyday user, is to really get all that stuff under control and to have a strong foundation of trust that exists between, let's say, the Web3 projects and its users, right? So that seems to be something that every company strives for, is obviously to build trust, but even more in a new and sprouting industry when it comes to Web3 and crypto.
I know security is such it's another beast when it comes to Web3 for obvious reasons, and that's another area that still requires a pretty significant focus. And I know that you had I think it was Josh on your last podcast.
Josh Kenyon, co-founder of Praxis. That's correct.
Yes. Yeah, and I think so. The was really around wallet security, right? And so
that's correct.
That is in hacking wallets is not going to go away. So what we can do is we can use tools like, I think it's Kill Switch is Josh's tool, but we could use his tool. But then also, combined with education, these are all of the ways that you are vulnerable by using a wallet or by storing your secret phrase digitally, right? So I mean, but I do feel like sometimes there is this apprehension to surface some of those really obvious threats. How security is still, if we're going to really build mass adoption. And I think sometimes surfacing that in content, sometimes I get pushback on that, right? So because maybe it's not even specific to that project. We're thinking of education on Web3 overall. Sometimes it's just exposing that can be met with some resistance. So
but it's a valid concern within the entire Web3 industry. When we look at it, like, as much as we want to sometimes turn an eye away from it, it's something that exists. And while it's being such an important part of being able to, at this particular point, participate in, let's say, Web3 and crypto, it's something that certainly needs to be addressed. And I'm glad that you brought it up with Josh in our last podcast. Yeah, because with Kill Switch, his goal is to really minimize the amount of crypto theft that's been happening due to, let's say, malicious actors trying to get into your wallet, right? So that's something that will never ever go away. But the thing is, the thing is what can someone do to, first of all, educate themselves on what a wallet is, what are the different ways to get compromised, and so forth, and then find ways to protect themselves. Because the whole premise behind Web3, for example, is that it's non-custodial, right? So the ideal is to be able to control your own assets, and with that comes also the responsibility to secure your own assets as well. So as you mentioned, being able to get the education to understand what to do in order to protect yourself is absolutely key in growing the entire industry, because every participant now is going to be somebody that is going to add to the growth of the entire ecosystem, regardless of whether they are participating in a DeFi project, an NFT project, a game, for example. The nuance of that is across the entire board. So something that Josh has developed with Kill Switch is absolutely invaluable, because everybody should be educated in terms of protecting their assets when it comes to crypto theft, which is something that's a growing concern right now, and we're working towards getting that solved, of course.
Yeah, and I think as an industry, we obviously can do a better job, but I would say really it is, at the end of the day, it is responsibility of the user. So it is. That's why I do like, even for myself, is looking at tools like Kill Switch and looking at even kind of add-on help me to feel more secure, because even if we educate, we use marketing content to educate. So to be able to stay on top of that through a content strategy, probably not realistic. Of content, education, and tools, right?
Correct. Yeah, you need the tools, because what's the point of putting content education out there if they can't act on it, right? Because there's no tools to actually go about and put that knowledge into practical use. So yeah, you definitely to combine the two, because that's how it becomes really, really. So let's shift gears really quickly here. So our goal here is, or the primary goal here at on this podcast, and primarily with Mobile Growth Association, as we shift a lot of our focus now in the Web3 space, is to serve as a resource of help and make work, as easy as possible for people in the Web2 space by simplifying the concepts in Web3. I just want to ask you a few of these questions here just to, let's say, just to help people who are kind of on the sidelines or looking to understand the Web3 space better. From your perspective, Timothy, for someone that's new to Web3 or getting introduced to it, what topics would you highly recommend them learning about that are fundamental to understanding this space?
Yeah, I do want to make sure we mention Mobile Growth Association and the Mobile Growth Summit.
Correct.
I've known the founders for probably around 10 years. They formed the Mobile Growth Association right even before mobile became ubiquitous, right? I like the organization a lot because, again, where I find myself at kind of the edge of technology and advancements, I feel like they're a good partner when it comes to learning not only about how I can do a better job marketing some of those really complex projects and products, but it is good to, I've been to Mobile Growth Summit in Vegas probably the last 6 or 7 years.
That's awesome.
And so so you get to meet. I think you're going to be this coming year in February.
Yeah, that's correct. I'll be emceeing the Web3 track for it, and I understand that you'll be there as well as Timothy. So that would be awesome to meet you in person. And I know that, as you mentioned, you've been there as a speaker and in attendance for the last 6-7 years, right? So that's very, very, very awesome, and I love the long-term relationship that you've had with the founders of the Mobile Growth Association as well. So we'll be having our Mobile Growth Summit happening in February. The exact dates is February 15th and 16th. And then what we'll do is we'll put a link in below, and then you can purchase your tickets there as well. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Timothy, and then I look forward to meeting you there as well.
Awesome. Out there, I think, especially with Web3, and just to answer your question, is what are the resources and what are the sources of information that I can trust, right? I mean, in some cases, because there's, as you mentioned before, which is absolutely spot on, I mean, there's this monetization or a financial layer that is just inherent in Web3. Not all components of Web3, but in most. And so ensuring that you're getting your information from reputable sources, both professional, like if you're in marketing or product or engineering development in Web3, or if you're in Web2 and you want to get into Web3, it is really to leverage those trustworthy sources of content and information, and that's always been, for me, it's always been MGS. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
and that's our primary goal, right? We want to be the center where people come to learn about Web3. So I'm glad that you had brought that up, because credibility and learning from sources, especially with Web3 being a fairly new industry growing, is you want to be learning from people who, first of all, have experience, who have been around, and where you could take that information and that knowledge and now really apply it to your own situation and your own business in order to improve it and grow it. And that's that's a core focus of MGA here. So we seek to push out content, not just through this podcast, but through all the different mediums as well, in order to a lot of people, whether they're native Web3 people or people in the Web2 space looking to migrate into the Web3 space.
Yeah, just to quickly answer your question, I think some of the concepts that are probably most important, and I would say from the lens of somebody who is in marketing or growth or community, but even people who are just genuinely interested in Web3, what's important is to start from a place of, is this project, does it have a token or cryptocurrency or not? Because from that point, then you can determine how, for instance, how tokenomics fit into a project that has a token, right? Because tokenomics strategy, which is just quickly is everything from how the token is allocated, or what is the utility of a token, what some of the financial components of the token, what are some of the technical components of a token. So it's really understanding how the token fits in. A lot of times white papers and light papers are really designed to do that. So every project should have those to understand. For an example, could be a blockchain game, right? Where there could be in-game currency, but it's not a cryptocurrency, right? I mean, in-game currency is nothing. There's nothing new. That's been around forever. So I think some of the projects that don't necessarily have like an actual token or cryptocurrency as a part of the game, but maybe they do have collectibles and skins that are created by the community that are part of that experience. And that's actually just quickly, one of the most exciting things I think on the gaming side of Web3 is in the future, the possibility for players, spectators, whoever to the game in that specific game, but with interoperability, fast forward into the future, that weapon or skin could be used in multiple games, right? So
Yeah, that's so cool.
that's
I think that's like a dream, like a gamer's dream, is to be able to do that. Like how you mentioned with the, let's say that with the NFTs, for example, it's well, first of all, the thing that you really highlighted on was the peer-to-peer, creating that
yes,
marketplace where, let's say now you have users create their own, let's say NFTs, for example, and now have a place where they could trade and sell it. Number
yes,
one, and number two, with the whole interoperability, that is something that is almost like, if you were to kind of like see what the analogy is in terms of a movie, it's almost like taking the multiverse of Marvel, for example, and you're taking all these different comic books, and then
mm,
now it'd be like, okay, well, how would this character, how would they behave if you move them into this universe, for example? And
I love that.
we've seen like a lot of that with how does Iron Man. I think that's something that really is fascinating to a lot of people and really expands the limits of imagination to say, okay, what happens if we take this particular weapon, for example, in the shooting game, and then we move it to this type of RPG game? Like, is it capable of doing the same thing, or does gravity affect it differently in this world? Like all that stuff is something that will be really reimagined coming into the future. So just being able to participate in that is truly going to be an experience that we've never ever had. It was this all fantasy prior to
Yeah.
leading up to this the concept of interoperability. So you have peer to peer, and then you have interoperability. So obviously those are two important concepts that somebody that is new to Web3 should pay attention to. Is there anything else that like any other concepts that are really fundamental in terms of understanding Web3, especially on an introductory level?
Yeah, I would say we think of decentralized apps.
So these are dApps, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
dApps.
right.
Yeah, I guess the underlying technology of blockchain, right? So you're building a dApp on blockchain. Is there a difference? Let's say the same app is in kind of a typical Web2. It's in the App Store. So this is the state of things today. Are there key differences between the experience of that same app, game, whatever, in Web2 and Web3? And does Web3 inherently amplify if you're in a game, centralized app, and you do want to pop over to maybe a similar game by the same developer or maybe different, you shouldn't have to start from the beginning. So maybe your leveling can carry through. So I think that's the one of the themes is at this stage is not every decentralized app is going to offer something completely new. I think it's still very early stages, but it's really like how does blockchain fundamentally change the app's functionality? And you mentioned, so obviously with peer to peer, that could be another huge component in an app, right? So
Hmm.
peer to peer transactions. So I think decentralized. The other thing that two other quickly two concepts that are emerging in my head or my world is the one is this notion of we touched on it a little bit of decentralized social networks.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to dive into it or talk a little bit more about that, Tim?
I want to make sure that yeah, because this is probably going to have wide distribution. I have to probably be careful if I want to.
Yeah, just feel comfortable
Yeah.
sharing what you can share. Totally
Yeah.
understand where you're coming from as well.
Okay. So just for context, I've a part of my role in marketing the last bazillion years has been to build a presence and build a community on social networks. And
Hmm.
so it started back in like 2009 when it was in YouTube. And so those channels, and I also helped launch a couple of social networking mobile apps. None of them are around because you don't want to compete sometimes with the large ones. And actually, I think so surprised me. That's
Yeah.
social,
Yeah,
like
that's
you're,
that was a social network that we launched as well. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, so,
yeah, we
yeah,
totally understand. Yeah.
yeah.
And sometimes
So
sometimes it still works out, right? Doesn't mean that if you're not around, it didn't work out. There's acquisition opportunities and all that come with it. But I do understand, like
absolutely.
usually as the industry matures, you're going to have incumbents that will really dominate the space, right? So if you're able to partner up with them, get acquired by them, or whatever the case is, that's a huge plus. But that's usually how we see the maturation of the space. It's at first there's a bunch of different companies, and then there's this amalgamation that happens, right, in terms of the type they want to integrate. And of course, we're starting to see some of that right now with some Web3 companies acquiring other Web3 companies as well, so that they could bring on that
Yes.
talent. And it's not just within Web3; it's within even Web2 coming in, for example, or companies that are more on the traditional side getting involved. I've been seeing Google really get their hands involved in terms of partnerships and so forth with a lot of Web3 companies. So, and especially in gaming, you have AAA studios, big gaming companies coming in doing partnerships. I believe Ubisoft is now working in partnership with Immutable X, for example,
Yeah.
right? So you're seeing this now kind of crossover between two different worlds, bringing the best out of, say, the Web2 space and the Web3 to create a brand new experience, which is very similar to what you had mentioned with, okay, well, how much value can the blockchain really bring, right? So obviously you have the peer-to-peer interaction, and at the end of the day, really, like for the regular user or gamer, if you want to call it, they won't even know that game is even running on blockchain. That's how
That's right.
seamless it will
That's
be,
right.
right?
That's right.
So
It's
when
very
we get to
important.
that point, that's the key, because a lot of people are they're not really into learning the technicals and the nuances that a lot of people today are really focused on. They just want to know, okay, this is the game. That's great that you have all this stuff working in the background, but all I want to know is it easy to play? Is it easy to use?
Yeah.
And how does it improve my life in some area?
Is just what is the value? I do feel like in gaming specifically,
Hmm.
that's where we're going to see the true potential of gaming when it comes to, again, to a marketplace where players, spectators, whoever can actually share in some of the success of the game monetarily, right? And that's we're seeing that shift, and I think, to be honest, you mentioned Ubisoft. I thought there would not be a day where the large traditional gaming companies, I was a part of one of them, would
Hmm.
would ever want to relinquish or impact their business model by relinquishing some of that profit that is generated by new content, right? So when you have loot boxes, you have new characters, you have add-ons. All of that is a part of it's going to flip that a bit where players who are loyal and who put in a lot of time not just playing the game but improving the game, like through sharing their feedback, through creating content, right?
Hmm.
There should be monetization, there
Some
should be
sort
a
of reward
financial.
mechanism that comes back to the people who really contribute on that level.
Exactly. And you know what? And just to draw the parallel to centralized social networks too. So YouTube, everybody now has content. There are content creators who could essentially be the age of what could be my child, who are multimillionaires because
Hmm.
they have YouTube channels where they're reviewing toys, and so
Yeah, Hot Wheels.
so yeah, yeah. And if you're helping to create the content, and the
Hmm.
centralized network is monetizing that content in significant ways. All of the major social networks are in billions, right? I hope that there will be a continuation of that, especially on places like Twitter, TikTok, maybe some of the newer social networks. But what I think I'm excited about is with decentralized social networks, or what's the acronym?
More like
It's
social fi, right?
SocialFi, yeah.
Yeah.
A component of SocialFi is
Hmm.
is a decentralized social network where everybody who is helping to grow that social network
Right.
is rewarded, is compensated. So go through a fairly significant, I'd say, evolution is GameFi. So anything to do with gaming and monetization, we know that there is current sentiment around play to earn is challenging.
Correct.
So I think what it's gonna require is that we build games on blockchain that can be played and enjoyed without any sort of monetization
Or
token.
financialization incentive behind it, right? It could be a standalone
Exactly.
game without the financial incentive, but the financial
Exactly.
incentive now is something that is an add-on to the overall experience, but you don't need it, for
That's
example.
exactly it. That's exactly it. There's and that's some of the newer studios that I've seen and have been working with. They're really embracing that concept, and I think it's good. And just one thing to add here too, which when we just to link back to user acquisition and growth, when you have a when you're working on a project or a Web3 game that has a token, what you'll quickly realize is this is most obvious in your social channels, you're going to have two very often conflicting primary segments of your community. The one is, or we would call them speculators. They are only there for financial gain, which
Hmm.
is that is a valuable cohort, right?
Hmm.
I think some people will say, well, they shouldn't be there because they're just speculating. Well, that's the whole point, right? So they
That's part of
deserve
Web3 and crypto, right? There is a
exactly.
financial side to it, and then they're interested in that project, but mainly from a financial point of view, right? So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just that's what they're interested in.
That's it. Yeah, and maybe they don't care if you they don't really care if you're gonna offer the ability to create your own skin. I mean, they will if it has an impact on the price of the
Of the
token.
exactly, but
But
they won't be really concerned about it in terms of the gameplay behind it. It's like, okay, well,
exactly.
what can you do with that skin, for example? Does it make you
Ex
look cool? Does it give you special abilities? That's not a part of the discussion that they will be involved in. They'll be more involved in, let's say, oh, this new skin came out, but at the same time, it could impact the price action of this token.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And they deserve a home. They deserve
Hmm.
content. They deserve the same level of attention and focus as the people who are on your project or your game because they're a player, they're a spectator, they have just this connection with maybe game characters. They are immersed in your metaverse, whatever that really kind of organic connection is. If it and it's not financial, it's an experience,
Correct.
or if it or maybe in some cases, if it's trying to think of another non-game decentralized apps that come out that there isn't really this clear. I think that is going to be the other primary segment that you'll have. And again, this is most obvious in games, but even in DeFi platforms and centralized exchanges, there are different levels. But really, the most impactful thing you can do at the beginning is to recognize the needs that, as I mentioned, often conflicting needs of those two segments, and then provide them a place. Discord, it's great because you can have multiple channels in a server.
Right.
Provide them a place to chat. I try to instead of even separating those two segments out, because to make sure that they get the content and information that they need.
I,
So, yeah,
I think that's wonderful how you mentioned it's not just treating every user as the same. For example, you're going to have, especially in Web3, when it comes to especially GameFi, you're going to have people that are really gravitated towards just more the financial side. So they're just looking to get some sort of ROI or financial gain out of or gain out of it. Versus, let's say, you have a real avid person who's genuinely interested in the game, who plays the game, and their conversations revolve around the gameplay and all that good stuff. So here, it's very important for like Web3 companies or Web3 projects to create a home for both of those types of users that will become advocates in some form for the project. So people who
yes,
are more driven by the financial side, they're still going to talk about your project, and you want them to obviously speak very positively about your project, because that's going to bring more people in terms of the financial side, and then also more on the user side. You want to be really focusing on the user experience to create that
yes,
game to keep them around. So it's really neat to
yes,
see that the company now is really their responsibility has expanded. Before it'd be more just focusing on, okay, let's know what we can do just to create the best user experience, for example, right? So that still needs to be core, because obviously, no project could survive if there's nobody on it using it, right? So the whole financial side goes away. We don't see any company that where it doesn't provide something of value, whether it's a product or service, that continues to go up in value in terms of their stock. Right. So here, when we look at it from that point of view, we see that it's a dual responsibility for that Web3 company to really take care of both the financialization side of things, and also the actual experience of the project. So you see that with especially a lot of layer ones, for example. You have people that put in, they just get interested in it because from a financial point of view, they'll look at that L1, for example, and they'll be like, oh, I see this as a financial gain. And there's people who are more on the developer side. They'll be like, I see this more as, how can I get involved in this project, or what type of material can I produce to really help people understand how this type of technology can really impact the Web3 space and the world, right? So that particular, let's say, blockchain or L1 needs to now be able to cater to both audiences. So that's really key that you had mentioned. I think being able to focus in terms of that duality is super duper critical, especially to growing Web3 companies today, because it's easy to forget one or the other and say that, okay, we're just going to focus on this and forget about the other side, when both those components really work hand in hand together.
Yeah, and I think that piece of information is going to be the most valuable, regardless of the stage of your project. If you're the founder, if you're tasked with community or marketing, that insight can have the most profound impact on adoption and growth early on. So
that's awesome.
So
because that's what
people who are
go ahead, Tim.
I was gonna say, so people who are listening in, they get I mean, that's not, you mentioned it, it's not a widely understood concept. So they get insight by listening in to the podcast.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad that you had brought that up, because that's so key in terms of understanding the space in terms of the holistic point of view. Like the whole point here is we want to give a 360 point of view, right? And
yes,
it's very easy just to kind of shine a light on certain areas, but here we have to treat it as though everything is all equal. We have to make sure that it doesn't mean that they work in equal ratios. It just means that these are areas that do need attention. And then from there on, you'll figure out how that works in terms of how much resources, allocation, time, talent, and so forth that you allocate to both. But it is a different approach, because traditionally, is this used to really just focusing on, okay, you're creating the best user experience. But now here within the user segment, it is partitioned differently now, right? So before it'd be just all gamers. Like these are just people who play a game. For example, there was no really financial side beside it. And then of course you'll have like crossover between someone who does play the game and who is also interested in the financial side as well. So you kind of have this Venn diagram you need to draw out between all the different segments of your user, and it does look a lot different from traditional, because there is a lot more overlap as well. And at the same time, it is a lot more distinguished, because you'll have people who will just be purely gamers and won't care about the financial side, or people who just want financial gain and don't care about the gameplay itself. But yeah, just understanding that's crucial.
Those two segments, sometimes they can align on common goals. Sometimes
there's conflict too that you have to manage, right? Because it'll be like, well, we're here talking about gameplay. Why are you bringing up the price action of the token? So as you mentioned, is really creating those different channels where they could actually, they're still part of the same community. So what it is they also know that it's within the same community. They know that there's little pockets or groups that they could go to, almost like a school, right? Everyone goes to the same school, but they belong to different niches within the school. But if you ask them what school do you go to, they'll be like, I go to whatever school X. And here's the same thing. It's like, what part of community are you part of? We're part of community X. But within that community, we own this part of the community, right?
Yep. Yeah, and in allowing people to seamlessly hop back and forth, right? And I think you mentioned, actually, it's good call out, that the ideal user that I found is the person who is concerned with the token price and how both market conditions but even if you're an L1, L2, how capacity can impact, capacity issues can impact. But they also fundamentally believe in the technology or the platform or the game. And so that person is really the sweet spot. If you can find, and that's, to be honest, I mentioned ambassador program. That's where I concentrate the ambassador program on, is that profile.
Awesome. I love how you, because that was going to be one of my questions, is how do you identify who would be a good person to be part of the ambassador program? And you just nailed it right there, right? Is you just described it as somebody that is like interested in all those different areas rather than just uniquely one area. So yeah, if you could have that, that is your kind of like your golden advocate or ambassador that you're aiming to really talk about and to really share the experiences of your projects. And what would your number one advice be to someone, let's say, who is not in Web3? Well, let's say that they're in Web2 right now, that's looking to transition into Web3, but they still have reservations about it. Like, what would that one piece of advice be?
The one piece of advice would be to immerse yourself into Web3 first. You buy some crypto or buy an NFT or create an NFT or play a blockchain game, join a DAO, and just visualize if you can see this having a big future, like those of us who are already in do, that should tell you if you should make the switch or not. Because somebody could easily go through that process and just see that, especially if they're following certain types of people. I mean, they're gonna see a lot of negative commentary. They'll see a lot of skepticism. Some of that skepticism is valid. They'll see a lot of FUD. If you see that and you believe it, then, and you don't see this utility, you don't see this future for peer-to-peer transactions, then that tells you maybe stick in Web 2 and help even involve Web 2. There are components of Web 3. Think of decentralization, peer transactions, blockchain development. Maybe there are components that can be brought into Web 2. But yeah, I would just say throw yourself into it, and then that should tell you if you're completely excited. And you can, the best thing about Web3 is you can visualize. I would start that project. If you're a marketer and we're talking about how difficult it is to segment out your audiences within the centralized social networks, maybe you're like, hey, I want to solve that problem, so I'm going to jump into Web3 and do that.
And do the same thing in Web3. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I like the idea how you mentioned, instead of just like being on the sidelines and just kind of learning about Web3 vicariously by reading, all the different content out there. And that's, of course, one way to learn, but also to get involved in it where now you have some sort of firsthand experience. And then with that firsthand experience and plus the information that you have come across, really now make an informed decision whether, hey, is this the place for me that I want to be at? And can I see a future with myself and how I could contribute to the space? Or do I feel that one of mine, for example, was in the mobile space in 2010, 2011 with the whole idea of in-app purchases. It was like, before that, it was like you heard about it, you saw it, you see like within the game, they always like had like a pop-up that came out, a notification, but after a while, I was like, oh, let's actually try it. Let's just go ahead. And I remember it was like a shooting game. I don't remember the name of the game. Obviously, it's been over a decade. But really, you buy this package for like $5 or whatever it is, and you have access to all these different weapons and whatnot. And I was like, oh, let's give this a try. Let's see how the experience changes once you get in. And I was actually mind blown because it created a whole new experience by just purchasing that in-app purchase, and very similar to the Web3 space. And for example, NFTs or the peer-to-peer marketplace, when you're able to access new weapons, for example, or new items, that totally changes the entire gaming experience to a brand new level that was not capable of in the mobile days due to, let's say, in-app purchases. And now with Web3, with the marketplace, that's going to allow items, NFTs, to be traded and sold, right, to other peers as well. So that's something that flashed in my mind in terms of the practical and the first-hand experience, or that advice is absolutely top notch. A lot of people would have mentioned a bunch of different type of things. Maybe it could be anything, but just that concept of getting your feet wet and feeling it, that is something that it's tangible. It's your brain and your mind will know what to do.
Exist within the Web3 universe because of the opportunity for a token, for peer-to-peer transactions. Yeah, it's and I think, but just as a disclaimer, because we are in Web3, it's do your own research, right? I mean,
Correct.
so I'm glad that you mentioned too, like you could hear something from friends or from somebody on Telegram, but again, mix that with credible sources. Again, just as a plug for MGA, the Mobile Growth Association.com, like that, there's a ton of resources on Web3, right, for beginners. And so in your podcast, obviously another source
Yeah.
of I'd say, really useful, but also credible information.
And we'll
So,
link all that in the description below, by the way, so that the listeners could access all those resources very easily. So let's talk about what you're currently working on. And I understand that you have a secondary project as well. So the first one is with Polyland Studios, right? So would you be fine with? I know that you're still right now in terms of the. Well, let's actually start with the Polyland Studios. What can you share
sure.
about what you're working on at Polyland Studios?
Yeah, so it's a blockchain game. They actually launched a game already called Revenge in beta. I wasn't a part of the project. I joined a couple months
Hmm.
ago. The game Revenge is what drew me to the project. I've worked on AAA titles, and I was at EA, helped launch Battlefield 3, Need for Speed. So there's this level of quality, obviously, in the gameplay and the mechanics and the art in the character and the narrative, right, that you get from a AAA title that I think sometimes in Web3 in blockchain games are missed, right? Because
Right.
again, sometimes the focus has been too much on the financial component, not
Hmm.
enough on the actual
Gameplay.
gameplay. So Polyland, they're building a impressive teams from Ubisoft, from Activision, all of the major
Awesome.
studios. I will say that so part of my first responsibility is to rebrand, so we won't be called Polyland
Okay. So it'll
for
be a
much
different name.
longer. Yeah, which that's in Web3 that is also fairly common, which you
Yeah.
probably won't find in Web2. What you understand? Well, how did you come up with like this project name or this token name? And they're like, oh, well, it was like my dog's name, and when I was in middle school, it's like that's cool, that's great. Like, but how do people remember that? How do they build association with your
Exactly.
friend? So not that I don't think Polyland was any of the two founders' dogs' names, but so we'll rebrand. But the game Revenge will is currently now in development, so it's a completely different game with an anticipated release of sometime in second or third quarter.
Perfect.
So
What type of game is it,
yeah,
by the way? Are you able to share what type of gameplay it is? So like the type of users that will be attracted to the game that you're producing?
yeah. So the game has been a first person shooter. The game production team is really focused on maybe not a multiplayer or PvP component, but maybe it's like a spectator or almost like maybe there's a Twitch style component, right? So where
Like an
you can,
esport type of angle to it?
yeah, actually, yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, that's like actually a really good reference. Could have, yeah, maybe esport components, just not like the betting and
Right.
wagering and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. All
and
that stuff,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. So, but I think the narrative is pretty compelling, and I don't want to give away too much. Yeah, if people are interested, follow us. It's Get Revenge is our new social handles. So it's at Get Revenge, but
Okay.
Revenge it's Revenge with
I remember you had mentioned that you're working on a second project. So yeah, would you be able to
yeah.
share on a little details on that?
Yeah, actually, and this is even much earlier stage. So myself and a co-founder who's also been in web almost the same amount of time that I have at various L1s, different protocols. We are working on a product that I would say people who are in Web3, if they use any sort of like asset tracking app, so if it's like a CoinGecko or CoinMarketCap, Delta is one of the probably one of the um, more recent, but also I'd say most sophisticated when it comes to like a true mobile asset tracker.
Hmm.
And that's Delta is also was acquired by eToro.
Mm.
So what we're doing and should become obvious when I mentioned how I see an opportunity for educating people on potential for financial sovereignty in crypto and DeFi and Web3. What we want to do is have a product that allows you to seamlessly track any of your digital assets all in one place. I think a lot of times too, if ETFs or you do bonds, if you do, and then you have crypto and then NFTs.
So this tracks just more than just crypto. So you're looking at the entire investment space, right?
Yes.
So you'll be able to see pretty much what's going on all markets.
Yes.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Because rather right now it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, you're using one thing to track your crypto and then another thing to track, let's say, all the other traditional financial products, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so ideally it allows people to make more informed decisions. They have a holistic view versus just a really narrow view. So, and then the other part of this too, real quick, is that the projects themselves will also have a spot or a place within the app as well, right? I think that's sometimes what I get frustrated on is if projects do like an event, if they do a webinar, they do a podcast, they do something, I always feel like even though I'm following them on Twitter, I'm in their Telegram, I still feel like I miss it all the time. And I will say too, the centralized networks, that's intentional. They throttle anything that's crypto related. They throttle anything that's blockchain and web
Information. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there is a deliberate throttling by any of the centralized social networks. So what we want to do is provide a place where there isn't projects can post and can share their events.
Much more open and less censorship, pretty much, right?
Exactly.
Along those lines. Yeah. I love that. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, what we'll do is once you actually launch that, Tim, we'll have you back on the show, and then you could share a lot more about the project. So,
perfect.
Everyone who's listening, make sure to keep an eye on that the future podcast episode. That'll be exciting to see everything that you're working on right now and actually see the real tangible product that comes from your efforts right now. So, last question right here, Tim. So where can people go to connect with you and learn more about what you're working on?
Oh, well, it's funny because I just had this conversation with somebody. Those of us in Web3, or maybe some of us in Web3 marketing and community, we do an amazing job of building social presence and community for
everybody else, right? That's the marketer's dilemma.
It absolutely is. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn.
So in addition to LinkedIn, would you say that that's your main one? Or is there any other ones that you like to add?
Yeah, I do my gamer tag forever and also I have I'm on Telegram and Discord as it's Hustle Rust, which so it's literally just those two words combined. At one point I thought it was like it sounded really really cool because it was like the conflict between like hustling as a human, but then rusting as a robot. I don't know.
We'll talk more about the show. That's the whole point. Is it creates opportunity conversations like this, and not the whole point is for us to share information and to be a credible resource of help for all the listeners as well, right? And one of it is the opportunity that comes from it. So we're just talking between you and I, Tim, but also for everyone else that's listening. Maybe you're looking to bring people on your marketing team, for example, or whatever the case may be. And so if you want, you could take the next minute or so to share. Is there any particular talents that you're looking to bring on board to help you or your company grow and scale from here on?
Yeah, scaling marketing organizations in Web3 is really, I feel like it's definitely a strong suit. So it's needed, right? Marketing community in Web3 has become huge, right? And we discussed all of the different segments. You have to even consider regulatory and compliance as a part of. So yeah, so definitely community. Typically, the first teams that I start to build up quickly, and so and global folks based in the continents, major continents, content strategy that includes translation, localization, culturalization. Those are all important. So so community content, also creators, content developers, and then 1 to 2 content developers.
Awesome. Perfect.
For revenge. Yeah.
Sounds good. Perfect. Yeah. So that's one of there you go. That's one of the competitive advantages of listening on this podcast and also following the information, the content that Mobile Growth Association puts out there, is that these opportunities come up, and you'll be working with fabulous people like Tim here, who is a true
Awesome.
OG in the Web3 space. So yeah, this entire conversation has been absolutely mind blowing. So Tim, you're an absolute beast and a true OG in the Web3 space and the crypto space as well. So I just want to thank you for being an amazing guest on our show. So make sure to check out Tim and follow him. We'll put the links in the description below so that you can connect with them. And also, show your support for our channel by smashing the like button and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to see more Web3 OGs as we release more episodes every week. So with that, we'll see you in the next one.